What do you see that is the most important if you would be doing one thing to enhance the climate actions in the cities that you are studying or working? What would you do?
I'm actually not willing to accept that question this way. No, because I'm so much fighting for not only doing one thing. This is what a lot of people ask, and what a lot of people would consider convenient, the magical thing that they have to change and then everything is fine. But it doesn't work. I think there are, things that would have a bigger impact and things that have a smaller impact. But I would never agree to doing only one thing.
I am not allowed to speak on policy matters. I should just say that right now. I'm from a science agency, so not a policy agency. But I can say that the biggest thing that NIST can do, or the science community can do, is produce the information that a stakeholder like yourself can decide what is the most important, or a holistic approach. And what that information is, I still think the science community is trying to figure out, what is it that's useful, and in what way is it useful to provide to you. But I cannot comment on policy.
So maybe Anna, that would be something you might want to chip in.
So in general, I think, first of all, as I followed the conference all these days, I think the main challenge always in communicating, for example, with the citizens or with the public in general, is the common language, to reach a common language between the different stakeholders. So if we speak in scientific rounds too technical, so we will lose the citizens and also the interest and the engagement in this circuit. So I think that first of all, our all effort must be to be transparent in our communication and in our presentation of goals and challenges, and also in our insights to our, let's say, investigation topics, but also to get the people to be curious. So it doesn't matter if these are stakeholders from the business sector or from the NGOs. We have to reach a common language. I think that we haven't talked so much about this point. And I think, for example, what in work package 5 was presented regarding the schools, I think that all these materials are a good bridge in order to reach other stakeholder groups. And we have to engage a little bit more and be more transparent with what are the main topics that we can communicate in a way the public is willing to engage.
Thank you. Any comments to that right away? If not, then I would, Hugo, give the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this says towards real-time monitoring of climate action plans, and what I'm curious with all the people we have here, and also, for example, Richard for COCO 2, is maybe the difference for the how do you think that the city climate action plans and the national scale or even European scale climate action plans, how should that come together? Because it's not, we always hope that they will all work in the same direction, but it's not necessarily so. I mean, you can easily think of things that are not so good in the city, and you move them out, and then your city problem is maybe solved. But and it's not only national scale versus city, but it's also, as we've recently seen in the Netherlands, there's also discrepancies between how the city public perceives something and how the rest of the country may perceive something. So just curious about this scale problem. Like, do you think that can be separated, or do you have some advice on how to make that a strong case that everything is holistic, if you like, and connected.
Why are people looking?
Who is pointing at who?
Well, I actually would like to ask Thomas that question because of the because of the fact of you and Yvonne have done so much work on looking at climate action plans and trying to look at synergies and differences between them. And so I think that you probably have a lot of experience to speak to
Right.
that question.
So yeah, it's a very interesting question and complex. So we looked at for example, of Paris, where you have the city of Paris, the large metropolitan area, which has its own jurisdiction, and then the region of Île-de-France, and then the national level, and top with the EU at the very top. So interestingly, Yvonne, you like put all the numbers together, and they don't always agree. The objectives are already different. And it falls into the governance problem, who is really in charge of what. So the territorial kind of jurisdiction and boundaries for the cities really can I really control my emissions? So that goes also into that. So Paris would tend to focus on things they can really control. The best example I like for Paris is they don't manage their public transportation network. RATP, famous for the strikes, is led by the region and not by the city. And right now we have a right-wing elected official at the regional level and a left-wing elected official at the city. So you can imagine all the tensions at the regional versus city level. And the objectives are different. And so on the territorial problem, absolutely agree with you. Sometimes the region will have a tendency to focus on the employment and the industry, and which looks very bad on the scope 1 emissions. Work in a place now in Reims where they have this giant agro-economy business, and so their industrial emissions have increased. So for them, it's bad. Well, technically, I keep telling them, they produce sugar from sugar beets. Well, it's actually way better to produce sugar beets locally than to import it from Brazil. But that is not part of their carbon budget. And so the objective for the local municipalities is to grow jobs and have a very strong industry, which looks bad on the emission reporting, which could then be blamed by our networks. And so it goes into our monitoring problem, which you talked about the scope 3 emissions, which for Zurich, way larger than the scope 1. And unfortunately, we're still looking at the tip of the iceberg. And so we have to be careful also how we show our results and how we publicize them. The elected officials could take that as a very negative image to say, yeah, you're showing me that France is looking bad. And they are in terms of scope 1. But now if you had more of a community or scope 3 included, they might look much better than other cities, which are importing these goods from elsewhere. So that's the way we also portray our monitoring systems. And we have to keep in mind that we are limited to a specific side of the problem. We don't see the whole picture. I'm wrong, sorry.
Werner, yeah, and then
I think you are the perfect 3 people to answer the question. I was, and I think I was not the only one being excited from the graph that Thomas showed yesterday of the decreasing emissions from Paris. Everybody was excited on this, so we will have this for Zurich, we will have this for Munich very soon. The question is, can we compare it? Will there be, or is it our job in the project to develop standards? Your institution is a lot about standards. Cities might compare each other, and then for that they need standards. So what is the role of standards, and how are we coming towards good standards in the comparison of the achieved reductions?
Well, I guess I can talk about the standards piece. So, and what we're doing in terms of standardization. So you're exactly right. We need to have standards that can underpin a lot of the work that we do to provide some sort of basis, some sort of foundation, not just for climate action plans, but for trade and commerce as well. You know, you have to be able to measure a carbon credit in some sort of transparent, credible way. Otherwise, how does a market work, right? So that's really important. And I don't know if the science is completely there in which we can come up with a full, you know, here's what you need to do, here's the standard, here you go. But we have started the standards process within the international metrology community. We submitted a work item there, and that takes a long time to do. But I also think that the work that the international community has been doing, for example, there is a committee or group within the WMO, the ICOS group, that has published a best practices guideline for at the urban scale. It's a first draft. There's still a lot of work to kind of polish it up, and hopefully over time we'll get it to a more robust state. But it's a first draft that people can go to and kind of and look at the measurement and measurement methods, techniques. I think the recommendations that are going to be coming out of this project are going to be key. And I think, as we go along, putting those recommendations, putting the reports out there will build towards the standards process that we absolutely need. When will we get to standards? It's probably going to be a ways out, but that's what we should be achieving. But I think we're making some inroads to do so. So that's what I could say on the standards piece.
I think it was like two parts in this question. Standards, yes, and I'm sure that city and representatives here would love to have a standard. This is what we need to do. Everybody would be happy. But the comparison you asked, Bernard, is that something Amewu, maybe as representative for Zurich, or anybody representing a city which is online or here in the audience, is that something in your mind that you want to compare yourself against Basel or Paris or whatever?
For sure, that's very important, but it is really challenging, because if you look at the city of Zurich with 400,000 inhabitants, I would have to compare with Wanne Eickel or something like this. I mean, like, this is actually a rather small city in Germany, right? On the other side, if you look at the financial aspect of Zurich, I would have to compare to a really major city. So it is not easy, and it is challenging. And I think we adjust, at the moment, it's still adjusted depending on topic, right? If it's air quality, you look on how many cars, how many people are there. If it's something else, you look at other aspects. It is not easy, and of course we would welcome a robust standardization to be offered to us to make it really comparable across the sectors. But I'm not sure, as you said, it will take quite some time to really get the scale that will work for all. But
I do think some of the recommendations that can come out of a project like this are really important, though. And we were talking the other day about, just for example, how do you categorize certain sectors? And different cities categorize things in different ways. Or there are assumptions that are made in terms of categorizing emissions that aren't fully transparent in the documentation. And I think if we want to do some sort of comparison, those sorts of assumptions, those sorts of categorizations need to be standardized themselves or made more transparent. And I don't know if you do that through things like the GPC or the common protocols that are out there right now, or the ICLEs or the C40s, and you try to get them to work together to help cities, their city networks, to be able to reconcile those things. I just think that is something that's a low hanging fruit that could possibly help with the comparison between city estimates. Just my 2 cents.
I'm going to take the work of Yvonne Alvarez again. Yvonne, you should be here, not me. So she did a comparison of Paris and Munich, and it was really interesting because Paris is actually a saturated territory. So pretty much what is happening right now is prices are going up, and so people are leaving the area. So population of Paris, intramuros, as we call it, inside the Beltway, is decreasing, versus Munich, which has a much larger city limits, and Munich is expanding. And so you already have these two patterns where Paris can actually have more and more people, but it's outside its own city limits. So the definition even of what is the city limit is terrible, because it's not an isolated body that just because of political boundaries. And so that's a good question. So I'd love to have geographers sometimes to come to us and just say, okay, this is what we call a city, economically, socially, politically. We might need to face that question, which I know has been a lot of papers on that. And so for Paris, they can always say, well, we're decreasing, our emissions are going down, we're kicking the cars out. And then Yvonne looked at the projection, well, except that number of cars is increasing in the suburbs of Paris, population is increasing. And most likely people who have cars and kids are likely to move away from the Paris downtown, and just so you're going to have a potentially communicating vases effect. And so we need to have that into account. And this is beyond city of Paris. So the mayor will not technically care, or maybe she will indirectly, but not as a responsibility politically. So it's a critical question. Absolutely.
Martin.
Well, on the global scale, we often talk about geoengineering as one of the measures to combat climate change. And I was curious to hear from Amewu maybe about engineering in the cities, and I especially ask because there was that story that was picked up by the media, I think last summer, about the artificial cloud spraying water at the Turbinenplatz or something like that. And to my understanding, there was quite some criticism to have a big concrete square with hardly any vegetation and then trying to spray water to cool the city again. Well, was that only a kind of public relations kind of thing, or how the role of engineering in cities of combating the urban heat island, for example?
Well, that is a challenging question because I wasn't fan of that cloud. To give other people context, so there was the idea, it was an innovation project that was called Strato Zurich, and it was a artificial cloud produced on I think 9 meters height, from a ring of 6 meters diameter on a square that is really hot in summer. And the idea was that it might cool actually the surrounding. There are a lot of these efforts with spraying water in the southern European countries, and I also know Vienna does a lot. But if you look at them, they are always very close to the floor, or to the surface, or they actually where the water actually touches the people, and so the evaporation takes place on the people, so they really feel it. With a cloud on 9 meter height, and then you have convection from this really hot concrete, it's challenging. But still, I think there should be the room, especially for a city of Zurich that has quite some resources, to do experiments, even if they might not be as successful as hoped for, but at least we did the experiment, and it actually attracted a discussion also about urban heat islands, right? I mean, like maybe it wasn't really cooling the space, but it caused a discussion, and there's no bad publicity, right? That's what people sometimes say. And even if it was discussed very critically in the media, sometimes for really not scientific reasons, it caused an awareness. And I think awareness is a big point. So we were, I think I'm getting off topic maybe, but we were talking about also communication beforehand. And I did this citizen science project because what do we need to talk? What do you need to talk to the administration? What we as administration need to talk to the public, right? This is also another step. And so we tried a citizen science project where we used strawberry plants. We called them airberries. And so we distributed them in districts and also to school classes. And then we asked the people to put them out on their balcony and send back the leaves after 2 months. And then we did measure the susceptibility. Okay, I can't say it, but you know what I mean. Not gonna get any better anymore. So and funnily enough, the worst was my plant. But the thing is, people get engaged, and this is not a very, of course, it's not a scientific measurement, and it's not very accurate. It's not very precise. It's none of this stuff. But people get aware of air quality issues. People get aware of, oh, there is actually pollution that I can't see, but it's somehow measurable. And people then get interested, for example, in looking into the data that is published on our website. So yes, it is sometimes not that straightforward, the experiments that might be performed, but I think they can always be considered helpful to get into contact and into discussion with the public. Oh,
please, Anna.
Yes, thank you. Related to what Amewu was saying now, I think that also the public involvement is fundamental in order to ensure also the legitimacy of climate action plans. And let's say all the question around the multi-stakeholder arrangement is of great importance when we want to launch, let's say, for a city area, plans that need the participation of different sectors. So as we learned from Barbara and Jessica in the Klimarat, for example, there, even though there is a multi-stakeholder representation, there might be a lack of legitimacy because it's not transparent at all why certain people are participating in the Klimarat. And I think that from the cities, for example, as the main actors in implementing the climate plans, there should be more engagement in getting in cooperation and in exchange with the different stakeholders at different levels. So you need, I think, site-specific. So Paris is different to Zurich and to Munich public policies, but you need also, let's say, stakeholder-specific addressments. And I think that what we learned in these 3 days is that the engagement might be there. So if you give the public the possibility in the schools, with the heating, with the cars, with the bicycles, to know more and to engage, that this might also have an impact on the CO2 emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions.
Richard, you have raised your hand.
Yes, I did. On this same discussion, I was just wondering the link between engagement with the general public for air quality versus greenhouse gases. Air quality is very tangible. If air is very polluted, you see it, you smell it, you know it. If you do something about it, you can also see the difference. It's fairly short-term scales. Greenhouse gases is a whole different story. So I would be really interested to hear more about any lessons learned already or any ideas how to translate this engagement we already have within air quality aspects of a city environment to greenhouse gases.
Richard, is that a question for the panel or is that a question for the audience?
Well, whoever has ideas, I guess. Because I think it's a tricky thing we are facing. How do you really engage on a problem that's not affecting people directly in their day-to-day life? I mean, yes, there's global change, there's global warming, there's all these aspects, but it's not as tangible as air quality problems.
But this might be already a part of the awareness that Amewu was also addressing. I think that if there are more information and more transparency concerning the city problems in climate action plans, and the challenges that a great city is exposed to, I think that there might be also a different attitude. So we saw from the climate strikes and all the civil society organizations that are already aware and have a knowledge about the connected and entangled points, that there might be then afterwards also more pressure on the different actors, also on the business and the industry sectors. So I just wanted to emphasize the awareness part again.
Actually, I was wondering, I mean, we showed this tool Zurich has with the different, what is bottom-up inventory thing, interactive. Do you know how users, people act or react to this, and how many people are actually looking at this?
So
Because this is one of the starting points to engage and to see what works and what not.
So this toolbox is it's still all I would say in a late pilot phase. It's not yet for the public, but it's definitely a toolbox that should be taken into consideration whenever the administration itself is getting active in terms of combating urban heat, or when we are also, I mean, like we are building new buildings also for the administration, right? And so then when we are refurbishing buildings, what could be done? That's why I was mentioning also the one high building for the hospital, which is a city-owned hospital. So when this is refurbished, we also look what can we do there in terms of heat combating. And we are working on a public toolbox, and there are actually within the well, now I'm missing the word Bewilligungspraxis. What is that? Does anyone know what's Bewilligungspraxis?
Permission.
Permission
We call it
process,
permission.
exactly. So if you want to build your new building and you need your permissions, we actually look at these aspects too. We don't only look at noise, for example, but we also look now at heat combating aspects. And there are more and more private, you know, sometimes there's a fight that is like, you know, I need to build this building and I need to be profitable and I can't spend extra money on all that stuff. But there are more and more private companies that actually now approach us and say, like, you know, we want to build up there on that mountain side, and but we don't want to limit the airflow. So could you do measurements beforehand and tell us how we could adjust that? And they implement that into the competitions for the architects, what they are going to offer. They actually put it in there and say that the requirement is to look at these and these aspects. So it is getting slowly more and more into also the private sector. Say something.
I just want to say that I think that there have been a number of papers out, but I think that there should be a lot more papers out by the scientific community with the intersection of greenhouse gas and air quality. I mean, there have been done a lot in the transportation sector, but I do know that there is this confounding factor of the fact that when you reduce greenhouse gases, you also, or certain air qualities, you change the chemistry of it. And so it's complex. It's not an easy, straightforward, you do this and you get this. But I think that's a real challenge to the scientific community to do more studies where we combine greenhouse gases and atmospheric research. And how we communicate that's a different story, but I think it's a worthwhile research endeavor.
We have two questions there from the audience.
Okay,
Yes.
yes. So Katri from ICOS, Eric, thinking of let's say that we are dreaming of an end product from this project, which would be some kind of a tool platform which cities could use. I don't know if this is just in my head or is it becoming reality, but at the moment we don't have any regulations for cities, right? There's no greenhouse gas regulations other than the citizens who are demanding something. And then there is not really money in the cities to put into the measurement of their climate actions, I would say. So is there really a market? Is there a need for this type of platform based on your experiences with the cities? Market as in parentheses.
Yeah. You go.
How many customers do you have?
The answer is no. There is no market if there is no regulation, because public administration, they have to respect the use of the public money to respect the law. So to do an extra expenses that is not obliged and forced by the regulation is not always so correct, because the city cannot enjoy to do everything that is innovation. I understand the cities. Huh? The cities can believe and can trust in a project, can try to be the first one, but imagine for a second that a city consider that everything that is considered nice is as useful for the community will do. It's for this that exists the regulation. Unfortunately, I speak about this because it was our feedback from the market. Huh? The market, they would like to do, but if they are not obliged, why they have to spend public money in something that is not compulsory? I know that I push a little bit to the limit, but it's the truth. We pay our public administrator to respect the law and to do an application of what the law imposed to them. So why they should spend extra money in something that is not compulsory for the city? So I think that regulation, to me, regulation is the solution of the issue. If there doesn't exist a European regulation imposing to the cities to drop down the emission because otherwise they are not entitled to me, that would be the right way. And if we really believe that we have to go toward low emission trajectory, we have to take this as an imposition by law. It's my personal point of view, and maybe I have a too much drastic and solution, but I spoke with so many cities, and I didn't find one city, no, I have one. I will not say the name just for that say I don't like your platform. The rest, I think I spoke today 80 cities, more or less. No one said I don't like. All the people say I cannot spend money in this because it's not compulsory. So I don't know if it's right, yes or not, if it's right or wrong, but it's the reality that I meet on the market.
Maybe just to complete that. So there is no regulation in place, but there are mechanisms where you can actually offset carbon, right? So you could take it as at the project level, and you can prove that you were doing a massive renovation and you're going to save that amount of energy, and et cetera. So then you can trade the carbon in the European system. For example, there is this trading market. You could go even further and just invest in, I don't know, outside the EU, and you just regrow a forest and you can get these offset systems. So we know it's actually with these weaknesses and strength. We highlight a lot of weaknesses these days because we have no monitoring system on that. So it's a lot of trading has been a little shady, but there are protocols. All these protocols are inventory style, meaning you report your energy and whatever, et cetera. So it's very Excel spreadsheet type reporting. The other one is on the market, and Kim just touched that, and I want to say, because this is actually growing very fast these days, and there is a lot of money in there. It's the green bonds, the ESGs, the green portfolios. So you have these investors that are looking for green projects, and if you can claim that your investment is green, it attracts more credits. You can have these labels, you can get into portfolios. So there is access to the green finance behind that the cities don't even know how to access, but they start to learn. And they see that finally it's going to be a market-driven solution right now because there is no regulation in place, as David was pointing out. And we're slipping into that. So I've been asked by maybe 15 different companies doing ESG portfolio management to say, what can I do to help them show that it's a green portfolio and that they're better than the competition? So this game is already on, and the train has left already the train station, clearly. Yeah. How far is it going to go? How big is it going to become is an open question, but people are jumping into it. With Kim, we had discussions with different actors in the US, in Europe, everywhere on the planet, yep. Because we're talking about billions, if not trillions. So that might be the end game if we have no regulation in place, and it's going to be a market-driven solution for now.
Fully agree with you. If it's not regulation, is the standardization. We have to normalize, so to have something that is recognized by the market. Is the second axe on which we are working hard, and I fully agree with you. And the industry start to say, give me the evidence that is normalized, that is a standardization, that is ISO, and I will invest because I can connect with finance, carbon finance. Yeah, you're fully right.
And you know why people who are in the Metrology Institute are very interested in this problem, right? Because, or at least we're trying. But I mean, that requires everyone within the scientific community to be able to contribute to that standardization process as well. And there are mechanisms for you all to do so. And any recommendations that come out of this project would be helpful when you think about communications, not just to communicate to the cities, but thinking about communicating to your standards boards as well.
Can I directly ask a question on this?
And then it is Yvonne afterwards, yes. You used up the
Now it's
battery.
on. Now, the city of Helsinki is building wonderful bicycle lanes. So when I am not going with the car, but with a bicycle, I'm saving CO2 emissions. Is this my CO2 emission on the market? Is it belonging to the city of Helsinki, or is it belonging to the fossil fuel company that is selling less fuels?
Bicycle company.
Or the bicycle company that produces my bicycle? I think that's if you go to the market, that's the question. I think the cities can do a lot, but they are not getting the credits, unfortunately.
I don't know if they are. I mean, as they're learning, and certainly within the bond market, I don't know how it works here, but in the bond market, there's certainly money there and for green projects. And if they can, and more of them are understanding that they have to make the dividends, they have to prove or show some sort of metric that they have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions. Now, some of that is shaky at best, but it's hopefully over time going to become more robust. But that is actual revenue that is potentially going to be available to cities. I mean, I don't know.
No, it's true. So if you build a tramway line today, you can also look for foreign investors. You explain that you're going to offset that amount of CO2 because you calculated it and some models of like how many cars you reduce and etc. And then the investors will get their carbon share. So if you subsidize for 15%, you get 15% of the carbon offset. So then you hope that Eni or Total is going to come and buy your tramway to compensate for the emissions. So that system is in place. Paris has done also massive renovation for social housing. And every time they renovate at like 2,000 units at once, they have this massive reduction of energy demand. And so they can also trade that for carbon compensation. And so the problem is to have the experts who know how to prepare the document, explain how much you have offsetted, and get the money for that, which goes into the European Commission or to the financial market. But they're learning how to do it. And big cities are getting ready more and more to do that. And there's a lot of money to be made. So you imagine the... But you're right, who gets the emissions? And so we don't say that, but like the double counting, the triple counting, yes, it's a major, major problem. Carbon emissions, we think, are counted 5 times sometimes. Everybody gets its emissions, and the way it's attributed is very obscure because, again, there is no standardization. So every finance company, and I'm going to stop, I'm talking too much, but you have like 15 different green labels right now on the market. You can go to BlackRock and JP Morgan and BP and I mean BNP, sorry. So they all have their things, and it's very geopolitical because the Europeans wants to own the green finance market and the green bonds. They have their own incentive they see where they have advantages to put on some technologies and not others. So there is also this giant market fights, I mean, across the different branches to make sure that the future will be the Euro label will rule. And the future investment will be made following that Euro label. So it give you just a bonus compared to other companies. So there are these big fights. And even the standardization of that is being discussed at the EU a lot for how to agree on all these portfolio managers and giant institutions to find a common protocol.
Can I ask Amewu that what is the...
Hang on, Katri.
Okay, Amewu, you come from the city of money. So what is the city of Zurich? You should be able to capitalize on this, right?
Oh, yeah, actually, I have to say from my perspective, because I'm probably not the right person to be asked. I'm too far down to have the total overview. It is the discussion is not that much about how to capitalize at the moment. I mean, this is potentially a luxury problem, but it's really about I think a certain impact is also the direct democracy, right? So if there is enough pressure also from the public that you can actually bring in your own bills, more or less, right? If you have enough people to sign for an idea, you at least get it discussed at the city board, and it potentially can evolve into really being implemented into the constitution of the city. So I can't really tell you where the city of Zurich is trying to make money out of it, besides the fact that we, as I said, we have our own energy company. Yeah, that I can't really.
So can we, just a second, Yvonne was a long time for that, and then we have Dominic as well.
Is there nobody
And then,
online?
sorry.
There are.
Yeah, what I was
Thank you.
actually wondering, so your target of reaching climate neutrality by a certain date, 2040, was it for Zurich? And the title towards real-time monitoring of those action plans, like, are you actually seeing or calculating the actions that you're putting in place to see if they're actually bringing you to that target that you have put a label with the GHG emissions on? So how do you get there? Because you have shown a nice dashboard, but this only allows you to look back. Okay, did it work? Did it not work? But like looking forward, are any of the actions that you want to put in place, like for example, renovations, do you actually have a calculation on how many CO2 emissions or GHG emissions in overall are you reducing, are you offsetting with that kind of actions?
Yeah, okay, so I didn't go into too much detail of that dashboard, but no, there are of course some factors that you can put in. If you know how much emissions you have from an oil heating system, what kind of how much emissions you have from a gas heating system, or how will be the difference if you put in a heating pump, right? Or if you insulate the wall. So there are factors for that. And so there's always also a prospective estimate. If you put actually also in this dashboard, you can assume you change these many houses and you reduce by or change that many cars to electric cars, what would be the impact? But what we also need is, I mean, there are the factors that are now on our current knowledge, right? But I think science is constantly evolving, and science actually gets the numbers better and better. Even though we don't need down to the 17th digit, we still need to know if the number is right. And if there's any improvements from the scientific side to get these factors better, we will of course implement that.
Thank you.
I have quite a different question. So the cities devise their climate action plans and want to become carbon neutral by 2040 or 50 or whatever. At the same time, climate is changing, and so one impact of that is, of course, that winters get warmer and summers also get warmer. So that will change kind of the heating demand, but on the other hand, also increase cooling demand. And so far it has not been so clear to me to what extent and how cities are consider accounting for that the future, I mean, 2050 will be different from today, and buildings have, for instance, have a very long lifetime. So the way we build buildings today is essential, whether they're efficiently built, that they can deal with this increased maybe cooling demand in an efficient way in the future. So it's maybe goes away quite a bit from this monitoring of climate action plans. But I was always wondering to what extent this important aspect is factored into these projections.
And well, if I answer for the city of Zurich, it's not straightforward, right? Because on the one hand side, the city of Zurich doesn't allow you to build a private air conditioning. But on the other side, we have also laws regulating the working environment of your employees, right? And if it gets too hot, you somehow have to build active air conditioning at some point. So there's always some kind of complexity, but at least for the city of Zurich, we have this very, very big heat pump that is working with the water from the lake and the river, and why it can support with heat in the winter, it can actually also cool in the summer. So we are even trying to have, water heat pumps that can work as cooling system in the summer. And it has to be thought about also potentially with these earth heat pumps, if they can, use cooling in passive cooling in summer. I think this is still a discussion that needs to go on. And I would say science and unfortunately also the climate itself is changing faster than administrations and politicians are used to, right? It always takes time to discuss and to figure out and to accept the knowledge from the from academia, and then find a law and compromise. And the things are just happening very, very fast. And I think the political processes also need to adapt and need to get faster. But on the other side, getting faster might get you sometimes slightly off track, and then you have to return to get on track, but with a feedback loop. So the question of how are we handling the heat in the summer is also strongly discussed within at least the Zurich administration. I don't know about Paris.
Good question. They're pushing for the cooling and heating, as you said, the geothermal distribution of water. So with the waste burning facility, and then they heat up the houses. And so now there are a lot of projects to try to connect as many buildings as possible to that network that is underutilized. I know Munich is also having a massive system for water distribution and cooling and heating houses, and they're really developing that. So I haven't worked too much on the question. I've seen on the US side, and Kim would talk more about it, America has a lot more cooling system already in place right now. And we could already see this double seasonal cycle with like heating, and you shift the pattern in your spatial emissions. So it's really interesting because you go from well distributed from all the houses to a one giant point on the power plant distributing the electricity. That's all I've done so far. I know Paris is really pushing on that to cooling down the houses by not CO2, not carbon energy sources. But
so, Henrik and Richard, you may answer, and then we go back to a question in the audience. Yes. Richard,
yeah, my hand was before the topic here. I just had a comment, if I may, to briefly go back to the regulation versus market solutions. And it's not a question, it's a comment. Just for those of you who are not aware, but it's kind of interesting that today the European Court of Human Rights is dealing with a few cases for different countries in Europe. And one of them is France, for instance, where a mayor of a city has submitted a complaint versus the state of France that France is not taking sufficient steps to prevent climate change, and that this failure entails a violation of the right to live, the right to life, and the right to respect for private and family life. So things are happening in these frameworks as well, which might lead to further regulation on greenhouse gas emissions as well. But it's interesting to follow that.
Okay, I think, Richard, did you finish your comment? Okay, thanks. No, well, in fact, I'm going to maybe change the topic a bit. I'm sorry about that, but it's also kind of a question and a comment, because this is also about basically how to move research to operations. I mean, it's also about monitoring, of course, not only real time, but also long term and operational monitoring. And as you know, I mean, maybe my focus is Copernicus, and as you know, at EU level, it has been decided to establish this anthropogenic CO2 monitoring and verification support capacity. This is something that Isidoro is doing. Richard will know much more about this. ESA is going to build and launch the satellites. EUMETSAT is going to operate them. It's a huge thing. But of course, as you know, this will not provide, or this support capacity will not provide the necessary results unless, of course, there is also the observations, the in situ data available. So my question is, and of course there's a lot of research going on. I mean, ICOS Cities, the poll, Corso, Cocoa 2, all these different projects. That's very fine. A lot of things are going on in cities, but how can we best secure that also these initiatives, monitoring these data, can also flow after the end of a project? How can we ensure that, in fact, these data will be maybe even openly available, but at least provided in a form that will be reliable, will be fair in a way, so that these data can be used as part of integrated systems, for example, which are needed to actually provide the information about greenhouse gases in the future, in the long term. I mean, we are not talking about a short-term project here. We are talking about maybe a vision up to 2040 or even beyond. So the question is, all the activities done at city level now, how can we ensure that these important data will be flowing also in the future?
Can I just respond to that from the US point of view? So from the US point of view, I think we've tried to start to build the capacity within the US government to provide that type of information and combine it with air quality as well, because we know that those two things are actually intertwined. Recently, there was a request for information for a federal system. I'm going to get this wrong, of a near-time greenhouse gas system that would involve a lot of interagency collaboration. We don't know what the governance would be for that, and it's out actually right now for request for information, so you can go online. I'm more than happy to give you the link. You can read the strategy, but the idea is now to start ingesting the research and science that has been out there, and to start to bring that into the federal government to at least provide the data, not necessarily the services. There's a difference between data and services, and we expect there to be a service industry that uses the data, that can translate that to the appropriate stakeholder. But that's what I think the direction, I hope. I can't say it will. I hope that the US government is going in. Richard, I'd be curious from Richard's point of view, because of what they're doing, because they are also data providers as well. But obviously, you know, this can't be one-off projects, in other words. Richard, are you gonna? Do you want to respond to that?
Probably Henrik is the better one to respond to this. I mean, in situ data within Europe is complicated, and it to some extent is linked to regulation again. So for air quality, there's clear regulations. So countries have to measure certain species, which helps then as input for the services we provide on air quality. For greenhouse gases, we don't have this. Of course, within Europe for greenhouse gases, we have the ICOS research infrastructure. So this is already a great way forward, where countries subscribe to provide the observations that we want to make. But we're still missing many countries in Europe. So how to really engage with them more? It's not really up to me, I think, to say. It's Werner and Henrik who have more knowledge on this. But I agree, it's critically important to make sure we keep this going and even improve on this aspect.
Yeah, I would also say, because we were discussing this before, Kevin said this also, that the landscape is changing, right? In governmental positions, you didn't have people with a PhD generally. You didn't have data scientists, but now we need data scientists. So when such a project starts, ideally, in my vision, we would be able, you develop some concept and we could, you know, carry them on. Because if you looked into my talk about the health costs by impact by air pollution, you see that they were only done every 5 years, right? Because actually doing our emission inventory, it's really up to now that it's done like cell by cell in a huge table, right? And the numbers need to be constructed, and it takes ages. So our emission inventory was very, very detailed, because it includes really every single heating unit in the city of Zurich, and the measurements, and not the top-down approach. But it took ages. So there was just not the capacity and the competencies to automate this. And this is what is now coming, right? There's now the push that, I mean, this whole real-time monitoring. What is real-time? You know, when I get down to once per year, I'm actually real-time, because before I was only every 5 years, right? So this is also a point that we have to take into account, why in the academic background, people quickly code something and then they have the second resolution and it's plotted and all that. This is not in the governmental space, right? We have tons of data, but we actually don't know how to work with the data and how to make it, how to harvest it, right? And so this is something that we have to grow into as well. I mean, there has to be some time of growth allowed to the governmental section as well.
Of course, I have to answer as ICOS director. I have to answer the question. Henrik, can I invite you to the next General Assembly of ICOS and discuss with them the question of the let's say, long-term operational system? I was once writing on a questionnaire about innovation, and then the question is, how is innovation functioning in ICOS? And I was very close to write, well, we have these wonderful ships of innovation that we construct, and then they start sailing. And then there is the HMTM cliff where they all get wrecked. And the HMTM cliff is, we are going to our General Assembly, we say we have something that is really nice, wonderful innovation, we want to make it operational. They ask how much HM, and then we give a number, and then they say too much, and then the ship is wrecked. So I think in this research infrastructures, but also I think in other monitoring systems, the innovation is really difficult, because we have to do investments, and getting the investments done is always a big problem. So it's easy to get a project like this one where we can develop all these wonderful tools, but when it comes to a permanent observation, operational observational system, then it's very difficult. And I think that's part of the game, to get people convinced that what we have achieved is wonderful, but that we could achieve much, much more if we have a system how we can make all these innovations operational. But I personally have not found a solution for this. I think what the minimum outcome of this project is that we give the deliverer some kind of a design study. It should be done this way or that way, but whether this will be implemented inside ICOS or differently somewhere else, I don't know. And that's, of course, a problem that I have as a director. We are always writing these proposals, and we are so excited to have this project and develop things. But when it comes to the long-term implementation, perhaps the European Commission or the EEA can help with that. But getting the money out of the countries, of the member states, is increasingly difficult.
I'd like to just take a more optimistic view, because we've been in this game for a while, and I do think there has been progress, and at least in our government, I know that there has been changes in administrations that make you probably be pessimistic about my optimism. But I do think at the scientist level, at the programmatic level, there is definitely the building of will to start building the infrastructure that can provide not necessarily a fully automated data assimilation system, which is going to take a long time to do, you know, no matter what you need, I mean, no matter what. But to start bringing the capability into a more operational role out of taking the goods from the scientific community and bringing it into the programmatic level. And, you know, our challenge is always because our federal agencies are very democratic and they don't always necessarily work really well together compared to Europe. We have this problem, but I think you're starting to break down barriers. And I think that there's this general will. We've been marching forward towards this. And I know we've been marching towards this at different times, just like you said, we've come to the cliff, we've fallen off, and then we try to go up the hill again, and then we fall off. But maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I feel like there is starting to have enough momentum that we're going to get there to build the capacity, maybe in a larger space, maybe not in the city space and individually, but within the larger space, so that we're not going to, regardless, as a federated system, we're talking about the US government, we're never going to give cities or any other stakeholders the information in the format that you need, right? But we may be able to put that out there so a lot of service industries can go ahead and package that information up that could actually then provide that information in a way that you may need, or some other stakeholder. But I have a lot of optimism. I think that there's been a lot of progress. And I think you've seen, I mean, there was a WMO symposium not that long ago. I didn't attend it, but you know, on this near real-time system, I don't know how much of that's going to actually come to fruition, but you see the appetite. It just happens over and over again. People are interested, they're hungry, they're engaged. I don't see this stopping. It may stop for a moment, but it's going to start over again. So maybe that's just me being an American.
No, I agree. I actually agree, because that was said so often, there is no regulation like in air quality, right? But not yet. I mean, that doesn't mean that there will be never a regulation concerning greenhouse gases. And it took also time to implement regulations for air quality, and they are still changing. So I would also share your optimism and say it's not yet.
Can I?
We have a question from the audience.
Oh, you wanted to comment?
Okay, and
Yes.
then we go back to the audience.
Yeah, well, yeah, sorry, just one quick comment. I mean, looking at the CO2 MBS, I mean, it's actually a quite nice example, and I think also Copernicus is a quite nice example, because we try, in fact, to look at this in a holistic way. So we cannot do what we would like to do without all the components. The design principle of Copernicus is that for the in situ component, we rely on what's there already, what's out there. I mean, so that's the design principle. And that's why we need a lot of coordination. We need to work with networks. We need to explain why these data are so important, why it's so important to put them into this operational environment in a way. But still having the end goal very clearly defined, monitoring of greenhouse gases, makes this somewhat more easy, not easy, but somewhat more easy at least. And I think we should build on that. And of course, there will be a need also in the future to work together, to coordinate more, to make this more clear. I mean, these how essential this information is, and how essential it is to make them openly available in a reliable way. I mean, but we have a great chance here, and for research infrastructures in Europe, I think also now you talked about coins and the coins project. I'm the contract manager for this, and I think we are going to discuss what to do next. And certainly we will put more emphasis on trying to coordinate between research infrastructures and Copernicus in the future, so that we will enhance the understanding among research infrastructures, how important it is for them to contribute. And of course, Copernicus as such cannot come with a pot of money and fund everything, but the EU maybe can through other channels. And certainly, of course, we would need national funding as well. There's no easy solution to this. It's clear it's going to be a combination. But we have here, in this case, we have a wonderful example where it is actually possible to explain why all the components are needed.
Yeah. So I hope you can hear me. Great. So, I mean, in many publications, I can read 70% of CO2 coming from cities. More than half of the people worldwide live in cities. And actually, some authors of these papers are also in this room and really happy about this. And we're also talking with Zurich, with Paris, with Munich. All cities have a lot of money to implement real-time monitoring and to do that action. So I would be really curious about your vision, how all this, what we are doing here, can scale globally to other cities that don't have that resources. Is ICOS Cities, is it a showcase? Is it a prototype? What do you think about this? How can it scale globally?
I think this is touching on what was just said about the remote sensing and satellites. So I have to bring this a little bit back in, because that would be then a cheap data source, let's say, globally looking at. But
right.
Please, Thomas.
Yeah, so first I want to make a comment, because we talked about that with Kevin Gurney and Kim in the past about the 70%. You have to take it with very extreme care. Being very cautious about it, because that estimate comes from a United Nations report, which is unclear how they calculated it. So let's say, yes, urban areas are more than half, something like that. When we discussed with Kevin, we had some kind of numbers in scale, but yeah, the 70% is used way too often, and I'm guilty. And well, you need to justify, right, where you're working. So on that question, the scalability is very complicated, because you could go satellite. So I have here colleagues, and I'm sure they will jump in there right after. When you look at satellites, it's a fantastic solution. I mean, it covers wide areas and etc. But it has its own limitations, we all know. And detectability of these plumes is actually quite difficult. And so at this stage, when we look at what is available and how much it costs and what we can do right now, most cities in the world are undetectable. I mean, let's be clear. Past the top 50, 70 cities in the world, I challenge you to even see the plumes from space. A city like Zurich will never appear on the satellite images. I mean, unless you're in the middle of winter and it's like accumulated for 4 days of like this, and maybe it's cloudy, so you won't even see Zurich at all. So no problem. So that is a core issue, because when we talk about near real time, it means you need to be able to provide every day or every week or every month. And Paris, January, you're going to have one image if you're lucky of Paris, one snapshot over a whole month. So the satellite has these intrinsic limitations that unless we go for an active LiDAR mission with super high accuracy, which I'm sure it's possible technologically, but it's going to take like massive investments and real testing. We're trying for methane right now. The Merlin missions is on, and so these active LiDAR missions are difficult. They're tested at the NASA centers. There are different instruments being tested, but we're not there yet. So then goes the easy solution we have at hand right now is the in situ sensors, right? Except that as of today, a single high accuracy in situ sensors cost about 130,000 euros without calibration gases, without rental cost, fees, insurance, technician time, etc. So it may be 200K for a single tower total. So yes, even Paris is not happy. Even Paris is not paying. Nobody's going to ever pay a network of 15 stations at 200K each, and you only have the data. Now you need to process it, and you need the inventory to go along with that, and the supercomputer to run my fancy transport model. So all these costs are enormous, and nobody will take them. So we haven't talked about it, but there is a technological roadblock right now. We need to lower the cost of instrumentation if we want to get that widely distributed and scaled. Or we need to distribute the cost. We need to find some sort of scheme. It could be from the industry side, could be from long-term investment, could be from, but we need to break this technology roadblocks. And we've been, I mean, I love Picaro, no problem. We've worked a lot with them, but my God, we need to do better. We are 20 years later, and we still pay half of the research grants on just the instruments. And it shouldn't be. The cost should have been down now. So we need to invest in these new technologies. We need to lower the instrumentation cost down. set up these sites where we can, and the satellite will come as an additional information, very useful, because you will be able to track more places and more systematically. And I'm hoping that in 10 years from now, measurement errors will be down to, I don't know, 0.2 ppm. Maybe I'm dreaming, but this will require massive investment that we were talking about. And as I'm talking now, I'm not even sure NASA had a satellite in the pipeline.
Well,
Maybe one.
no, I
The
mean,
last one was canceled, right?
yeah. So I mean, I think that there's going to be the question of whether or not geosynchronous, what are we going to get from, I mean, look at what Traponi has been able to give us. We never thought that that was going to be able to give us as much information as what it has. So, you know, I'm again going to try to be the optimist here a little bit. But yes, it is unclear what the US is going to do, although there is some talk about potentially having a CO2 sensor on GeoXO, maybe. So there is still some discussion about that. But no, we don't have very much in the pipeline, that is for sure. Although commercial commercial satellites are starting to take off and other things as well. But I agree. But I don't want to take up this discussion because I know there are other people in the room having questions.
Yes, so I totally agree. I think the integrated monitoring capabilities is a way to go. But assuming that we have an ideal, perfect monitoring capacity, and then to monitor the action plans. And now all the cars in Munich is electrical based. And if we have our monitoring network, Munich reached climate neutrality. But the batteries are produced in China, in Beijing, or a city in Poland. And these cities are not climate neutral. So I'm just wondering what cities think about this problem. So do you think about, I mean, this could be like not really near term, but midterm, some kind of collaborative climate neutrality plan. So really think in an international point of view. Also like what Thomas before said, right? Considering it's scope 2, scope 3, etc. And I think it's not sufficient if only single city want to be climate neutral because your energy is produced somewhere else. And I think you alternatively, in the end, I mean, city need to get together and have a collaborative action, plan. So I just wonder, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I was just actually thinking exactly the same as you said, Gia, because we had an ICOS Cities talk in the very beginning from Oslo. It reminded me on the construction work picture you showed. Oslo has collaborated with the big construction machine manufacturer. They made them battery powered. So the city of Oslo is getting very good, very clean, fantastic. And then, yeah, what Gia said, so you just move it out from the city boundaries and you have a clean city.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'm gonna quote Kevin, the scope 3 is the scope 1 of someone, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm gonna let you talk because I think you have you
well,
thought a lot about that.
Okay, I was gonna make a comment on the sort of larger system operational concept and then let y'all react to it. But I think going back to this idea of operations, an operational system. I mean, we're doing the science to do pilots and sort of figure out the beginnings of an operational system, and we're starting to see prototypes of that. But there's still some really fundamental questions that have to be answered pretty soon before we before we move too quickly. And I still think there's a few things. For example, just looking at cities, we still really don't know what level of measurement and modeling one needs to get what. We don't have a quantitative relationship between the need for information and sort of what is minimally sufficient to get it, right? We know there's lots of questions and lots of needs, but I think we're still struggling with, do you need to oversample places crazily, or can you get away with this minimal mixture of observations and models to supply an answer to that question? And the problem there is that even within the city space, and I would argue it fundamentally just has to become just a subnational system,
There's lots of other entities besides cities that are clearly important at these smaller scales, but cities then exist on this massive continuum of beginners, ones at the intermediate phase of development, ones that are quite advanced. And they all have very, very different needs. And of course, over time, we hope they all march through that sort of evolution. And so the system not only has to think about now what is, and sorry, the last then element of that is then we have to think about cost. Because at the end of the day, an operational system will cost money, obviously, but we want it to be as minimal cost to achieve as much, information for the people that are going to use it. And not only do we have to think about this now, but we also have to recognize, again, the landscape will keep moving, right? The system has to be maximally flexible to both cities all changing their place on this trajectory and increasingly demanding more and more exacting information to do what they want to do. And so as when I think about this, I still think that we still have a lot to learn about what that mixture ideally is going to be. And we may not be able to answer it all, but we need to at least start to be flexible, not box ourselves in, right? That's always the danger in trying to think of a functional system, is that you think about it right now and not in 20 years. And it raises a lot of challenges. I mean, we need these pilots and these prototype efforts to get there, but I still think we got to bring in cost. We have to start asking what's minimally sufficient to answer certain questions, not what we can do in the perfection and good, right? We as scientists, we know we can do perfect and we want to do perfect, but we can't do that. We're going to have to be realistic about what we can do minimally at reasonable cost, maximize the mitigation information that cities and other entities need. So it's just a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I just want to say that I think that there are things from our research that we can operationalize. So maybe not the combination of measurements and like a more integrated approach where we have atmospheric observations and inventories and atmospheric meteorology and on this combined system of full data assimilation system. But I do think that, okay, you may disagree, or those people that work in inventories may disagree, but I do think that some of that can be operationalized, some of that system, there may be fundamental challenges out there still, but I think we can take that step into ingesting that into a more operational space. But I totally agree that a lot of this stuff is still very much research oriented, and I think it's going to take a little while for us to learn about the mixtures of what has to happen. But I don't think it has to be you go for the whole cabana, you know what I mean? You take elements that work and you bring it in the operational space, and then you keep elements that are research and development, and you keep seeding the money into the scientific community so that they can work on those challenges, That's my perspective. I don't know.
Well, directly to that, I think for minimizing, you need first to maximize. If you have a wealth of data coming from a really big network in one city or 3 cities, then you can see, okay, this works, this doesn't work. We could minimize in this direction, and then we can keep these very interesting measurements as a scientific measurements in one city, but we are not operationalizing it for many cities. I have one answer to Gia as well. The ICOS network, not ICOS Cities, the ICOS network is designed to measure, or at least contribute to the measurement of the continental scale emissions. So these indirect emissions from the cities you can detect in the continental budget. But we need also a global budget, and what we are also doing is we have one more project. It's smaller and it's more a design project where we are sharing our experiences with Africa. So we are supporting the African Union to build some kind of a continental approach. And we have one pilot there with cities. And what we have learned already there is that, of course, we cannot go with this very expensive equipment to African cities, but we have other citizen science bottom-up approaches that we can test there. And what we also can definitely will test is the connection between greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. So what we have learned from two different projects here in Europe, we are putting already in this project as an integrated approach, because we are learning here in Europe. It's perhaps artificial to make a distinction between air quality and emissions. What we can do in this approach is that we bring it together in the beginning, and we are learning also from the African cities what are their demands and what are their requirements, and I think that's even bringing something back to our approach here.
Not a problem from the monitoring side. So the monitoring capability can be perfect. So the question is whether the city can think about a little bit beyond itself, saying, okay, it's not the only important thing that I'm climate neutral, but also I would like to help an Africa city or a Chinese city, a Polish city to be climate neutral, sort of a collaborative climate neutral approach in some, I don't know how many years. Yeah.
Well, I would say not necessarily for specific other cities, but at least the environmental strategy of the city of Zurich takes into account that the majority of the CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions is actually off territory, right? So we are definitely trying to reduce that as well. Of course, we don't have a direct handle. We can't put certain restrictions on the concrete production in China that we will use here in Switzerland or in Zurich. But we can, of course, make recommendations or even restrictions on what kind of concrete can be used within the city premises, right? I mean, as an example. And so therefore, you, as a city, you could have an impact also on your non-territorial CO2 budget.
Yes, I think that's the parallel approach is meaningful. Yeah, so the monitoring and this controlling the scope 3 and scope 2. Yeah.
Richard, you have raised your hand.
Yes, I did. If I may, I just want to come back to Kevin's comment, and I fully agree with what Kim said. An operational system doesn't have to be perfect. Certainly not at the start, but what it does is it offers you a sustained and routine framework where you can transfer the mature science into something that's then applied in a policy relevant context. So it's an evolving system. You need to start somewhere. You need to make sure you have the momentum, and I think we have great momentum at the moment, to put things in place and try to address the questions that we get from society. If this is on a city level, we might still struggle in the beginning, but this will evolve. If on a country level, we might have a better way of looking at things, or with methane, it might be easier than with CO2. But I really see this as a long-term evolving framework that helps actually to move the science into applications. Otherwise, we stay with each year new pilot studies for this city, for that city, because there we have the infrastructure, or there on the other city it's relatively easy to do, and yeah, it does support the evolvement, but it doesn't get to the next level. At least that's how I see it. So for me, going to an operational framework is important. And actually, we've seen this within the air quality community, where we have done this over the past 10 years. And it really allowed to also have better interaction with the different user communities, learn from the requirements and from what the science can provide, and come to a much better way of dealing with air quality problems at all scales than we were able to do 15 years ago.
Thank you.
If you can, I just
we have very quick.
Very quick. No, because I want to react. In fact, in this aspect of operation, You understood in my word, I am a little bit worried about the speediness for the market to be there. But in terms of operation, there is no issue at all. I represent the industry. We have a team of 16 people. We are operating a system in Paris every day, and we are operational. And such as Kevin said, we are able to implement incremental system. This is something on which we are very comfortable. The idea to become operational. We need a marketing phase. The industry need to scaling up, need to organize a resource that grow up in terms of growing of the market. And you will build a new jobs for the future. There will be all a major arrival on the market of new jobs related to climate. So operational, no doubt at all. So I think operational we can do, and we will continue to do. What is important to have is a market in front of us that is growing and is pushing the idea to become more and more efficient. So to me, that is not an issue. Operational immediately. So no issue. What we need is to generate the market. So the city that really want to go in this journey.
I'm not sure if he meant the same operational. I guess you were more on the instrumental side, less on the modeling side, right? I mean, like, and as you said, it's not about being perfect. I think actually you have the same opinion. It's not about being perfect. It's about being, handleable. And you are operational on your scale. That's great. But I think what would be really helpful if there were more cities able to adopt some product out of such project. And for that, you need to keep in mind what kind of people are currently working in administration. It needs to be products that we can actually use. And I mean, like, while I'm trying to hire more data scientists and more scientists in general, or people with scientific background, this is a very specific situation for Zurich. Potentially in other administrations, you just can't do it. If you have a smaller city or so on, you just can't do it. I mean, in Switzerland, we have the NABEL network, for example, for the air quality that is for the whole country. And potentially, yes, something has to start on the more bigger scale, but it still needs to be handleable by the people that are, working with it. So it can't be too sophisticated. There needs to be the sophisticated research for sure, but then to make the instrumentational part operational, it needs to be easier. I just have to say that.
Okay, but I was on the same page. I was thinking about that. So I stop here because I don't want to run out of the time, but both of them.
So we have Henrik online has raised a hand, and then Leo has a question, and then we have to wrap up.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I can be quick. I mean, actually, Richard said most of what I wanted to say. So, I mean, yes, we need a good system, not a perfect one, that's clear. And also when you have a research project like the one you have now and other research projects with this ambition to then finally at some point in time at least partly move some of the results into the operational domain, the main thing as far as I can see is the dialogue. I mean, you need early on in any research project with this goal, you need to establish a dialogue between scientists and the operational domain. So that's clear, so that you're absolutely sure that at least part of what we do can be moved in a reasonable way. Another thing is also that we need to also at least, I mean, the US situation is different, but in Europe, I can see that now things are moving more and more in the right direction when we talk about open data. And open data is really important also in this context. When we look at Copernicus and we look at CO2M, the satellites that will be launched, all these data will be freely available to everybody. When we look at the products that will be produced by the CO2 MBS implemented by ECMWF, all these products will be openly available. And we can see now also that when we talk about in situ data, operational monitoring, more research-oriented monitoring, these data will also become more and more openly available. So when today we talk to networks about, I mean, what is the main challenge, and when we talk about users, so they will say, okay, it's really about sustainability and it's about data policy. hopefully this issue about data policy will be solved gradually, at least. The question about sustainability will remain, but of course, having a really good reason is the key. And I think we have this exactly for this topic. I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Theo, you want to go, but only with a microphone. And no, yeah, has to be short.
Then maybe you should take the mic, or Werner, to have the closing remark, because mine is quite specific and technical. So my question. So I don't feel it can be a last question.
I can say something quick. There are more efforts than we imagine. I mean, to be honest, we are very Eurocentric and Americanocentric. The truth is, it's already going on. Sao Paulo has sensors, Recife has sensors, Jakarta has sensors. Places in Japan, places in Cape Town, South Africa had sensors for 3 years. A lot of countries are moving. China. I have a letter from the mayor of Dakar in Senegal to say I want the same. So it's already moving, and we're spreading the word, and we don't realize because we don't. These are small initiatives here and there. There are typically a professor there, the service of air quality over there, but it's moving, and we receive a lot of requests. And the ICOS group that Kim was cited earlier, the WMO, receives a lot of requests from a lot of people to say, I want to do it. How do I do that? So we're already moving pieces. We don't even realize, but we are getting into these scope 3 emissions that Gia was talking about. China has invested massively. The number of CO2 sensors, you can ask Michelle how many have been sold in the last 6 months or more again, it's massive, meaning that you're going to see a lot of these sensors being deployed rapidly in the Chinese cities. So we might have this scope 3 emission finally that we need to close the budget. So it's moving faster than we imagined at the large scale. I just wanted to comment on that.